This lesson goes with your photosynthesis notes that you guys already got in class. So for the overview of photosynthesis, we've been talking about this for a while now. If you at this point do not know the overall chemical reaction for photosynthesis, you really need to practice and study a little bit. The reactants of photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water. Reactants mean that both of these molecules go into the process of photosynthesis to allow it to occur. Light energy is the energy that is used to turn carbon dioxide and water into sugars and oxygen. Now, we need to get a little bit more specific when we say sugars. The sugar that is made by photosynthesis is mainly glucose, which is C6H12O6. So it's very important that you guys know what C6H12O6 is. That is glucose. Since we start out with light energy, that energy is then transformed during the process of photosynthesis into chemical energy. And the chemical energy is actually stored within the glucose. The atoms of glucose have chemical bonds that hold them together. That chemical energy is stored in the chemical bonds of glucose. We've also talked about that a lot recently, and you must know this energy transformation. So the two steps of photosynthesis are the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. Another name for the light-independent reactions is a Calvin cycle, and you will be expected to know that. In order to get the process of photosynthesis started, chlorophyll molecules must be able to absorb light. So light must be hitting the chlorophyll molecules. We talked about the fact that pigments, like chlorophyll, do absorb light. So not only does chlorophyll give the plant its green color, it also absorbs light. Once the light energy is transferred to the electrons, those electrons get excited and they jump up. And we talked about the fact that we don't want electrons running around the body of the plant. So an electron carrier, which comes in and picks up electrons, must be a part of this process of photosynthesis. So our electron carrier for photosynthesis is NADP+. NADP+ comes in, picks up electrons, and it leaves the process as NADPH. So NADP+, when carrying electrons, becomes NADPH. Therefore, NADPH is an energy molecule. Again, the energy transformation that occurs in photosynthesis begins right here with this first part of photosynthesis. When the light energy is absorbed by the electrons, that turns into chemical energy. So at this point, the light energy has been transformed or changed into chemical energy. You can see in this diagram here, light is hitting both of those chlorophyll molecules there. You can also see the electrons jumping up out of the chlorophyll molecules to where it says electron acceptor. Once the electrons have made it all the way through the process of the light-dependent reactions, up at the top there you can see on the top right that NADP+ comes in, it picks up the electrons and it leaves as NADPH. NADPH is an energy molecule that will be transported then to the light-independent reactions so that it can power the process of the light-independent reactions. Another energy molecule that's made during the light-dependent reactions, as you can see here, is ATP. ATP is also transported to the light-independent reactions to help power those reactions. And once those electrons are taken away, more electrons need to be replaced. So as we talked about before with the light-dependent reactions, water molecules are going to be split, so electrons can be added back to the chlorophyll molecules and the process can continue. So here's some checkpoint questions here if you want to try them out and look through them. What you'll need to do at this point is just keep going through the PowerPoint, keep clicking through, and see if you can answer these questions correctly. I'm just going to go through them. Okay, so for a little bit more detail about the light-dependent reactions. The light-dependent reactions take place in the thylakoid membrane. And you can see on this picture to the right, you know what the thylakoid discs are at this point. If you do not know, you need to review more and more and more until you understand what the thylakoid discs are. The thylakoid discs are where the chlorophyll molecules are located, so that's where the light energy is absorbed. That sunlight energy is used to produce ATP, which you saw in the last couple slides ago. That ATP will then be transported to the light-independent reactions. As you can see on this diagram, the arrow is going away from the thylakoid. One of those arrows contains ATP. When the light comes in and hits the chlorophyll, it excites electrons in the chlorophyll molecules, and NADP+, the electron carrier, picks up those electrons and leaves as NADPH while carrying electrons. And again, those two energy molecules, NADPH and ATP, are transported to the light-independent reactions to help power that process. And again, we said that electrons are taken away from the thylakoid by NADPH, so those electrons must be replaced. Water, as you can see, is coming in from the outside of the chloroplast and hitting the thylakoid. That water is split apart to replace electrons to the thylakoids and the chlorophyll molecules so that photosynthesis can continue. The hydrogens of that water molecule actually stay inside the thylakoid for reasons that you guys don't really need to know right now. But in that process, oxygen is going to be released as a byproduct, sort of quote unquote a waste product from this process when water is split. So oxygen is released from the plant. The whole point of the light dependent reactions is to provide energy for the light independent reactions. So ATP and NADPH produced during the light dependent reactions will now cycle to the light independent reactions to power that process. During the light independent reactions, you can see that NADPH and ATP are entering the Calvin cycle, entering the light dependent reactions to power the process of converting CO2 from the atmosphere into sugars such as glucose, which will be used by the plant for food. Now, this process here takes place in the stroma, which is the liquidy portion outside of the thylakoids in the chloroplast organelle. So you need to know that the light independent reactions take place in the stroma. And again, the ATP and NADPH from the light dependent reactions, that energy is used to make glucose from CO2 from the atmosphere. So here's the overall process of photosynthesis. You can see that ATP and NADPH are cycled from the light dependent reactions to the light independent reactions. And as you know, ATP, when the high energy bond of the second and third phosphate is broken, that bond between those two phosphates releases energy that allows cellular processes to be driven. ATP then, once it's lost a phosphate group, it becomes ADP, which will leave the Calvin cycle and go back to the light dependent reactions to become recharged. NADPH, when it drops off its high energy electrons to help power the Calvin cycle, goes back to being NADP+, which is the electron carrier that goes back to the light dependent reactions to pick up more electrons. As you can see also, water enters the light dependent reactions and oxygen is released as a byproduct. CO2 enters the Calvin cycle or the light independent reactions, and using the energy from the light dependent reactions, that CO2 is converted into glucose and other sugars necessary for the plant cell.